I am entirely at your disposition, Inspector.
The items deposited in Walter Jones' safe clearly indicate that had he not been murdered, the marriage with Baena would have taken place, and you would all have been disinherited.
I was totally shattered to discover this. You know, Inspector, it wasn't always simple to see clearly through my grandfather's intentions. I certainly knew of a liaison between Baena and him, but I hadn't really understood its importance, I confess. I more or less understand the feeling of loneliness that must have weighed him down since my grandmother's death.
I heard that there's a chapel somewhere. Do you know where it is?
The chapel? I never heard any talk about it. Maybe Lorenzo knows something. It's he who built the tower, after all.
This letter that your mother wrote you gives you a very good motive for killing Walter Jones, your real father.
It might make a good motive, I grant you that. But that doesn't make me a murderer. And you know that perfectly well. Proof. Where is your proof, Inspector?
It's coming, Marco. It's coming. In the absence of a will, this letter from Edward Jones to your mother Isabella makes you the principal heir of the Jones Empire.
Really, you talk rubbish, Inspector. You can't forget that our grandfather had the firm intention of disinheriting all three of us, Sonia, Billy, and me.
Why did Walter Jones keep this compromising press cutting?
In the least, one can say that my grandfather had a complex personality. I guess he kept this document to prove he was innocent in the death of his son Edward.
What drove you to give up 10% of your estate to Noland?
Despite everything, I knew how much the Jones Company owed to the talent of Hubert de Noland. I wanted to reward him for everything that he did for the family's wealth. It's as simple as that. The amount that I had planned to give him was not yet fixed. This document was only a plan. In any case, this is not yet signed. The services provided by Hubert de Noland also concern the inheritance of the estate. On this point, Noland could not get me sufficient guarantees concerning my inheritance.
Simbi Laktar. Does this name mean anything to you? I'd like to know if you saw him these last few days.
No, I don't have the honor of knowing this man. Sorry, Inspector.
The murderer would have had us all believing in Noland's suicide if he'd not overlooked this fragment of the letter which changes everything.
I have the impression that you are losing the thread of your investigation, Inspector. I want you to find my grandfather's murderer. This document is a new confession from Noland about his financial swindling to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. And it is also the proof that my grandfather was the person behind Edward Jones' murder.
Don't you find it a bit strange that the housekeeper, Simbi Laktar, could have been closed up in the technical room for 3 days without anyone noticing?
Strange? No. I am ready to bet that an individual who is a bit resourceful can hide for entire months in this tower without anyone noticing his presence.
After all, why not?
Barnes, it's Jones.
Strange. It's not working anymore. Mr. Laktar? Mr. Laktar? Mr. Laktar?
I hope God makes sure that Noland is the last to die on this island.
The items deposited in Walter Jones' safe clearly indicate that had he not been murdered, the marriage with Baena would have taken place, and you would all have been disinherited.
My grandfather was a damn pervert, you can take my word for it, Norm. And frankly, it disgusted me to find out about his marriage plan. A filthy old man and a 20-year-old kid? It's nasty, don't you think? Thank God our luck is turned now, and I hope it'll stay on our side.
What can you tell me about your father and the conditions under which he died? And also, I'd love to know more about the relationship he had with your grandfather.
Sonia, Marco, and I, all three of us, think that it's our grandfather who killed our father. He really made my father suffer to death. My father was a good guy, but after Mom's death, he carried on as he could. He started drinking, but really drinking a lot, you know. So my grandfather didn't want to hear about him anymore. But then my father slowly started making it back. He restarted his music class, and he started caring for the three of us. He continued to drink a little, but he pulled himself together. You know what I mean, man?
This sordid letter from Isabella to her son Marco gives him a solid motive to kill Walter Jones.
But I don't understand. Why did Marco hide this from us? This is really monstrous. Plus, it concerns all three of us. Marco, Sonia, and me. Well, Walter Jones, my bastard of a grandfather, got what he deserved. He murdered my parents. Do you realize?
In the absence of a will, this letter from Edward Jones to his wife Isabella makes Marco the principal heir of the Jones empire.
Marco betrayed me. He betrayed all of us, in fact. But the death of my jerk of a grandfather puts us on a level playing field. Sonia and I are in a good position to walk off with a part of the estate, don't you think? It's nuts. Money. Always money. It really does make the world go round. And it totally rotted our family.
Why did Walter Jones keep this compromising press cutting?
Seeing what we know of my grandfather, nothing is surprising anymore, is it? They could very well have given the order to have my father killed.
Simbi Laktar. Does this name mean anything to you? I'd like to know if you saw him these last few days.
Simbad Lak what? No, Inspector. Really, it means nothing to me.
The murderer would have had us all believing in Nolan's suicide if he'd not overlooked this fragment of the letter which changes everything.
Okay, it's a long drawn-out affair. My grandfather's crap goes beyond the height of this hellish tower. So from now on, nothing can surprise any of us anymore, Inspector.
Don't you find it a bit strange that the housekeeper, Simbi Laktar, could have been closed up in the technical room for 3 days without anyone noticing?
Yeah, you're right. It's very bizarre. What do you want me to say?
I understand. I must take your fingerprints for the investigation.
My fingerprints? Because you seriously think I'm a murderer, Inspector?
Thanks. I warn you, the rules have changed. I am the inspector officially in charge of the investigation of the murder of Walter Jones, and I therefore have all powers at my disposal to bring this investigation to a close. The items deposited in Walter Jones' safe clearly indicate that had he not been murdered, the marriage with Vaina would have taken place and the heirs would all have been deprived of the estate.
Walter Jones was a real scoundrel. You should believe me, Inspector. But he's dead. In this business, it's old man Colio and his daughter who are the losers. That's what I think. They're just unlucky. But after all, they haven't lost everything. This island and this tower remain theirs until it all disappears underwater.
With regard to Walter Jones, everyone plays the victim. But some people didn't refrain from trying to make him fall from his perch.
I won't pretend to be indignant with you, Inspector. Jones did everything he could to push his grandchildren down this route. He deserved it, that old shark. Believe me.
What did you get in return for rescinding that Walter Jones be put under psychiatric care?
You ought to speak to Billy, Inspector. I don't get mixed up with the family affairs of my husband.
What is the connection between Walter Jones and your father's consulting firm?
You're certainly well informed, Inspector. Walter Jones is responsible for the collapse of my father's consulting firm. The jerk didn't want to help Billy, who was in danger of being finished off by the Russian mafia because of some gambling debts. The old man wouldn't lift a finger, and it was my father who absorbed Billy's debts. He did it for me, of course, but he counted on Billy repaying him in the shortest possible time. Obviously, Billy wasn't able to reimburse him. That put my father's business in difficulty. The poor man had a heart attack, and in fact, he almost died, you know. He's still not out of that mess. And guess what? The Jones Company is in line to buy my father's firm. I dreamed of strangling Jones, Inspector. Yes, I really dreamed it.
I get the impression that Walter Jones was not very affectionate with you.
Walter Jones knew that my father's health was poor after the payment of his consulting office was stopped, and he didn't do anything about it. Even though he was a self-made man just like my father, he could have tried to understand that for my father all would be lost. Especially because this was all because of Billy, Inspector. Yes, Jones was a monster. A cruel and heartless man.
All this seems to indicate that Billy got himself in a real soup. And his family with him. What do you think?
It is, above all, Walter Jones who got us into that soup, Inspector. That old jackal was in no position to give lessons in morality, believe me. It was he who never wanted to absorb the debts of my husband. Walter Jones, one of the richest men in the world, didn't let go of a cent for his grandson.
I didn't think Jones was such a jerk. And his accomplice, Nolan, doesn't seem to be much better.
As far as I'm concerned, Walter Jones can burn in hell, Inspector. And Nolan deserves no better. He's the one who advised his boss to let my father's consulting firm collapse to pieces so that they could buy it at a throwaway price.
This sordid letter from Isabella to her son Marco gives him a solid motive to kill Walter Jones.
I'm not really surprised to know of this horror. I understand better why Marco was the only one who interested the old man Jones. His son, born from the rape of his own daughter-in-law. What a monster. But in my view, Marco is a weakling, Inspector. I don't think he has the guts to avenge his mother. In fact, I'm trying to say that from my point of view, he doesn't exactly come across as one out to uphold the law, Inspector.
Simbi Laktar. Does this name mean anything to you? I'd like to know if you saw him these last few days.
I don't know who that is, Inspector.
Don't you find it a bit strange that the housekeeper, Simbi Laktar, could have been closed up in the technical room for 3 days without anyone noticing?
Well, maybe it's a ghost. Huh? That's all that's missing here. What can one say, Inspector?
Allow me to doubt that. Someone took a good deal of time, it seems. Who had the time to use these condoms?
correct match.
Martin used these condoms. Impossible to go lower. The stairs have collapsed. Well, we could say that Jones did all he could to be able to control his tower from his wheelchair. The person who stole the remote wanted that this document not be found. The goal was clearly to prevent the marriage.
I'm listening, Inspector. I want you to know that you can count on my total availability. I have a lot of free time now.
This sordid letter from Isabella to her son Marco gives him a solid motive to kill Walter Jones.
I'm not surprised. A man who could pounce on a woman as fragile and defenseless as the young Baina is capable of anything. Anything at all. I don't really like Marco Jones, but I can't believe he had the guts to kill his grandfather. I myself wouldn't have had the guts.
See you later. This could be useful.